So, hello. I'm going to talk today about that, as you don't know because you're here. Congratulations on making this far into the day. I hope you had a good one. I'll try not to let any of you fall asleep. So, you might recognize me. In case you're wondering. So anyway, this is where we are. I'm going to keep putting the slide up so you know how long we are till the end. So you don't sort of sit there going, where's he going with this? Is he going to finish? Is he going to waffle on for the next hour? What's happening? Introduction. This is a beginner session, and I am going to keep it very high level. And when I say I'm keeping a high level, that means I'm not going to start diving into things to say, look, this is how this works, because you don't need that. If you do need that, I'm doing another session on Friday, and I think Email's doing a session on Thursday on RavenDB, and that will actually go into some detail on how these things work. So as such, you'll have to take some things at face value. Obviously, at the end of the session, if you have questions and you do want deep information, just ask me questions, and I'll happy to actually go into detail on those things. So, for a start, quick hand poll, document databases, who knows what they are? It's getting better and better every time I do this. Cool. I am going to recap in about 3 slides what one is, but that's about all I'm going to do, okay? Because otherwise I'll spend 20 minutes telling you what one is, and then we'll run out of time to actually talk about anything meaningful. So, here's a relational database, and inside that red square there is effectively an entity. I'll call it an entity. The entire application today is going to be this horrible to-do list example. Entity here is a to-do list, and it's got some items on it, and each item has a category, and that to me is an entity. In a relational database, I've put it into 3 different tables. We've got a one-to-many relationship between the list and the items, and there's a well, actually, I think it's a one-to-one relationship between category and to-do items in this particular model, but that's not really relevant. In a document database, we just flatten the whole lot, stick it in one document, and call it a day. That's one row. It's one item. So, now you've caught up. That's a document database. That's what we do with document databases. We have a database, we flatten it, it's wonderful, great. Smiley face on the end just to make sure we're all happy. So, very quickly, I'm just going to show you what we're going to talk about today, so we're all on the same page. Here is a wonderful sample application which doesn't actually work. But you guys don't know that, so it's okay. Right. So in my project today, I have some couch code, I have some Hibernate code, and I have some Raven code. The fact that this Raven and couch is completely irrelevant. The actual code examples bear very little there's nothing idiomatically different between the two. Not really. Some features that are slightly different, but that's not causing any concern today. I've simply used 2 because that way I could reuse my model and change it slightly to make some points. Very basic MVC project. Got some controllers, got some models, got some view models. Nothing very exciting. I will talk a little bit about this. I want to make this quite clear, how this all fits together to a certain extent. Do you guys use an ORM in your current projects? In Hibernate? Good hands. Entity framework? Something else? Cool. All right, so you're familiar with the whole mapping thing that we have to do. I mean, I've been nice here, and I've used the Fluent stuff to make things nice, but XML files, whatever, who cares? You have to map your entities to a database. I say entities in the loosest of terms. What I've got here is a big bunch of property bags with information on them. They're not terribly exciting. And it's this mapping that causes pain sometimes, at least as far as I'm concerned. So you'll be pleased to see in my other projects there is no mapping folder. I don't need to do any mapping. We just serialize these things to the document store. Pretty much all I have to say about that. There's so little different in setting things up. Everything applies. Let's go back to this. So, yeah. There is a weighted disclaimer for all this code. It's purely conceptual, these projects. They do not run. I'm not going to run them. Some of the code is just probably invalid. I haven't tested it. I have no idea. I suspect it's largely completely valid, but I don't expect them to work. Again, I'm showing concepts here, and that's what's important. So let's look at how we round-trip data in a document database in an MVC, and some of the differences, some of the advantages we have when using a document store, and perhaps some of the disadvantages too. So, by round-tripping data, I'm just going to start with getting data in. How am I going to get data into my document database? So, there's a beautiful action which takes in some input model, and I'll do something with it. What's on that? I have no idea. Let's go and look. Beef my font size up so you can see it, maybe. So, first off, let's look at Hibernate and look at how we do certain things. If I'm going to create a new to-do list or to-do item, I've got to do some things to make that happen. And because I've got to do some things to make that happen, it's a bit unwieldy. So example, in my lovely example here, I'm passing an input model. Looks something like this. It's got data on it. It's incredibly exciting. These are bound to drop-downs in the view. These are bound to text boxes in the view. Whatever. And in order to actually persist this to my lovely ORM, what I'm having to do is actually pull out my relations from the ORM somehow using get or load. I always forget which one's which because I haven't used Hibernate for so long. So I apologize if I've done the wrong one there. Sorry. Is it the right one? Anyone know? About brownie points for anybody? Which one doesn't load it? Really? There's some Hibernate users in this room. I'm almost convinced of it. Well, if you don't know, then go and look it up, because it's actually quite important, because one of them doesn't load it. It just pretends to load it until you actually need it, which means when you're saving stuff, you don't actually load anything. It's just unwieldy having to do this in the first place. But yeah, how to load it and store it. Whatever. When it comes to editing an item, let's go and look at that. We have some issues if we want to use a model directly. And I always found this funny with MVC, because MVC isn't MVC at all. We don't do M, we do MV, or sorry, VM, and then bind that to a model, and then it's not MVC at all. So general advice in MVC land, when using an ORM, is you don't bind directly to your model. Does anybody here actually do bind directly to their model in MVC? Do you? Wow. Brave man. I'll get onto that in a bit. Fine. There are ways to make it happen, but generally a bit of a pain. Let's go and look at what it looks like in a document database. Let's have a quick peek. So, we have a couple of choices we can do. Here, when I'm editing this stuff, I can actually just do this. This works. This is the same code as I had before. I can pass in my actual entity. I'll say it's an entity again, loosest of terms, property bag. Some stuff on it. So coming from as JSON from a form somewhere or something like that. And I can just store it. Don't care about the relations on it. I don't care about the relations on it because I don't store the relations. You see here on my model, I've got a string there called user ID. And I haven't got a user because the user has no place on my to-do list. If I was to look at the same model in Hibernate, you'll see the main battle we have is that we have these relationships everywhere between objects. We have these relationships between different aggregates, as it were. You know, we actually have to store those on there, which makes binding automatically very difficult. What am I going to bind to in the model for that? What am I going to bind to in my view for that? Unless I make some incredibly complex framework code, it's not really possible. If I look at my Raven to-do item, should be this thing over here. See, everything's just IDs. I can bind that to drop-down really easily. I can bind directly to a model really happily and just save it. If I'm doing CRUD. If I'm doing CRUD. But I'm doing CRUD here, so it's okay. Let's carry on with that. So yeah, here when I'm creating a new item, I'm loading up the to-do list I want to add it to. I don't care about the relations, they're in there somewhere. I add the item, which is directly on my view model. There you go, save my to-do item. And I just save it, because it's just data. There's no proxying going on. There's no lazy loading going on. There's nothing magic behind the scenes. I've got a poker, I've loaded it, it's a document, it does stuff. And I've always found that to be a bit of a mismatch between what I do in Hibernate and what I do with document databases. So, yeah, that's writing data. There we are. So it's much easier to do direct data binding if you want to. We'll go into more detail on that in a bit because we have some interesting discussion to be had about denormalizing data. I love that discussion. It's my favorite discussion in the world because it's so contentious. Getting data out. This is my favorite one. Can anyone tell me what the problem is with binding directly to a model from an entity framework and Hibernate when passing things to a view? Okay, I know we're north, but you guys can answer questions. I know you're bad at it, but can we have an answer? Anybody? Yes. Okay, well, that's certainly it. If we're doing CRUD, though, let's say we're just doing CRUD. What's the problem with it? Yeah. Okay, that's one of the things. I think this is one of our favorite examples of something wrong with binding directed view models. I'm not actually going to do it here because I never do it. We have a view model over here, which is going to be a list of to-do items which belong to me. And this is our Hibernate demo. So to-do item that belongs to me, what information do I need for it? I need the name of the category it belongs to. I need its ID so I can do editing if I want to. And I need the name of it. I need that information. I'm going to pull that down somewhere. So here's a nice naive version of it, where I create that view model. The create items from list, by the way, just takes a list of to-do items and flattens them. So let's look at what's actually going on here. We obviously load the user because we need the user. We need to actually do a comparison on that user. Okay, fair enough. We get a list of to-do list back again. We pop over here into this method, and we go through every single list we pulled back and every single item on those lists and pull them out and pull a category out. What's the problem with this code? Well, yes, but performance-wise, what's wrong with this code? Okay, exactly. And it's implicit. Right? I can't see that it's happening. Because I've got an object, pulling data out of it, it happens. Because I've got relations there, it's really easy to do. Now, obviously, the correct thing to do is an actual query to go and get the data you need. But, hey, we're in Hibernate land, so whatever. We'll join everything in and pull it down that way. The point is, it's implicit. It happens automatically, you can't see it. You might sit there with a profiler all the time and make sure you catch them when it happens, but it happens. Now, with a document database, there's two ways to solve this problem. I'll actually quickly just show the SQL I was generating there, actually. With my naive version, it looks something like this, which is obviously suboptimal, as we can all see. And with my slightly less naive version, it looks somewhat like, not that, 'cause that's code. There you go. It's beautiful. I think. Don't diss my awesome SQL, by the way. It's been a while since I wrote any. I've definitely jumped off that particular train at the moment. Not to say I don't like it, by the way. I still really like SQL. I'm just no good at it. And that's the problem, right? Because a lot of us aren't any good at it. And that's why we have problems. Document database. Same view model. Looks like that. We recognize that. I want to make a point. That here's the same problem. Except, for one thing, on my to-do list, these are part of the same document. So there's no n+1 problem there anyway. I've pulled back the document. I automatically have the items on that document. But that's a design decision I've made, so it's probably not all that relevant. I still have an n+1 problem, because for each category I want its name, and I'm therefore calling load in that category. So the only difference between this code and the other code is this is an explicit n+1. I can look at this code and say, yeah, okay, each of those is a remote call, and I'm going to get shot by the lead when he sees that. Maybe. He might actually be nice to me and say, oh, Rob, what are you doing? You should never let me learn to write that code. You're useless. Go away. So what I can do is use an index. And I'll talk more about indexes in a second, because it gets quite complicated. But essentially, I've got a bit of code over here, just some querying. This runs in the database itself, like a store procedure or a materialized view. And when I ask for my view, I simply ask for my view. And it gives me all the data I need for it. So it's very easy to hide the n+1 and make it go away. But if it is an n+1, well, you've got an n+1. That's not very good. But you can see it at least. But that's only one of the options. So there, I'm still going to store category as a separate object over here and try and pull it out and do things with it. If we look at couch, and this is not to do with couch itself, because I could do the same with Raven and would do the same with Raven. Another solution, again, here's the same naive version, where I do a nice n+1 here. I can just denormalize the data. So you can see here that on my actual to-do item, I'm just going to denormalize category name. Because that's a solution, right? I mean, that works. And because we're working in a document database, it's actually very easy to do this kind of thing, because we haven't got a fixed schema. If I want another property on my document, I just add another property on my document. There's no foreign keys being set up here. There's nothing trying to protect you from the writes. You can just store data and get it out again. And that's one of the powers of a document database. One might also start criticizing it and say it's one of its weaknesses too. But I like it. So if we go and look at the model difference here, on my RavenDB model, I've got a to-do list. Item looks like this. I've only got a category. And on my couch one, I have... That's the end. That's not the end. I store the ID and the name, because I can. And it makes it easy for views. I will talk about that a bit more. But the point is, you don't have any implicit n+1s. They're all explicit. You can see them. They're in the code. You can even intercept that really easily and say, hang on, you've made too many calls to the database. Stop doing that. Which is what Raven does by default. Raven actually counts the queries you're making and says, actually, you've made too many, stop that. You're probably doing something wrong. I always like this because it causes a big divide in the audience. Who thinks that's a good thing? It's automatic. RavenDB will... You think it's a good thing. One hand went up. Who thinks it's a bad thing that RavenDB automatically does this? Okay, no one's got any opinion. Okay, fair enough. That's allowed. You probably have got an opinion, you just don't want to put your hand up because it's the end of the day and you're tired. It's allowed. So basically, it's a lot harder to accidentally shoot yourself in the foot. There's safety there. But let's look at the other end of the sort of spectrum when it comes to getting data out. Look at dashboards and complex queries. When you're writing a web application, do you do more writes or do you do more reads most of the time in an OLTP app? You do more reads. Good, okay. As long as we agree on that. I don't disagree, because that would make my next bit completely pointless. I don't waste your time, do I? So, I've got a dashboard. And it looks like this. I'm an amazing UI developer. So, as you can see, I've got a nice little table. And I'm going to display the most recent to-do items added across the entire site, with information against them, like the username of the person who added it, you know, the category name and things like that. Lots of data from across my entities. It's a big query. And I'm also going to list my top categories. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to list my most popular categories and show how many times they've been used. It's a dashboard. across your application, you've probably got loads of little things like this where you want to show information summarized. And it's a view. You know, it's a query across your data. So let's have a look at Hibernate and how this actually looks. And we'll ignore the whole n+1 thing because we'll say that we as a developer know about that and we're going to avoid it because we're good and we use nhprof. I've plugged that now. I can get some commission or something. Did any of you guys use that, by the way? Any kind of profiling tool when you're doing the Hibernate stuff? Does anybody not do that? What do you do? How do you know you haven't got n+1s? I would look at investing in anything that does that kind of thing if you're using Hibernate. There's a cost you can save by switching to Raven. Apart from Raven costs money too. Well, what am I saying? Okay, so dashboard. There we go. Here's my Hibernate dashboard. I have to find a lovely POCO here saying, hey, there's a recent to-do item. And here's a summarized category count. How am I going to get that information? Well, I'm going to answer that question. First off, I'm going to use link, because Hibernate does that. Actually, I have no idea how good the Hibernate link stuff is at the moment, so I don't know if this will work or not. But let's say it does work. Okay, let's be generous. I'm going to select my to-do items. I'm going to group by whatever the category is into my little group thing over here, and I'm going to select how many times that happened, because that's what you do. Probably got to order it as well, actually, but I haven't done that there. The SQL that's generated looks like that. That's not too bad. There's probably better ways of doing it. I'm not a data expert, so can't comment. Fine. It's not brilliant because I'm group bys and left out joins and things like that. But if I look at my recent to-do item, I've actually got a lot of information I want on this. Name, category, username, and things like that. And my query actually looks something like that. Now, if I've got quite a lot of these dashboards and view models around the place, do I really want to be doing lots of these? Really? You know, if I'm creating an application and expect users to be using it, more than 10? Probably not. Especially not if I'm using MySQL, which really sucks at joins. And it does suck at joins. The thing is, I don't want to be doing things like this. Because my reads should be fast. Because I do them a lot. Okay, I could put caching in if I wanted to, or I could do any of these things. But these are all slightly more weighty architectural concerns that I've got to start plugging in all over the place. I don't like doing that. I prefer things to just work when I write some code. So, if I look at Raven and the way it does it, you probably guess what's coming up next. I'm going to say the magic word index again, which still no one knows what it is. And my queries look like this. As you can see, there's nothing in my queries. All I'm doing is getting some data. And the reason there's nothing in my queries is because they're not queries at all. They're just reading data from a view. The view looks something like this. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to explain that because it would take me about 10 minutes to actually go through the whole process. I will on Friday, though. Hint. But effectively, this is a function that runs in the database and goes across all that data and creates a view for me. Call it that. Couch does very much the same thing, only you write it in JavaScript, which some of you may or may not like. It's getting cooler these days, so more hands will probably go up for that one if I ask who likes JavaScript. But it doesn't really matter. The point is, my query looks like this. I'm reading from a pre-created view. My reads are really cheap. In Couch, very similar. Although my code's probably horrendous because idiomatic couch is not my strong point. There we go. Isn't that a thing of beauty? So, the point is, I make one remote call to the database and say, get me that view, please. Just get it for me. Don't care. It's really fast. I haven't got to cache it. Don't need to. Might still want to, later on down the line. But right now, I don't have to care. I'm just going to chuck it in there and make it work. And I like chucking things and making them work. So, obviously these are what we just showed. dashboard things. We do lots of them. And the point is that with a document database, you're kind of forced down the route of actually creating these pre-created views. Because you can't do joins in them. Not really. You can't join across documents. They don't work like that. So now we're going to talk about denormalizing data. I'm going to start doing a bit more information about these things. Denormalizing data. Why would I want to? Now, as can be seen with the RavenDB example, if we're to dive into it closer, it is actually possible to query multiple documents. It's actually possible. It's not a join. Basically, once you've done the query, you can load up associated documents and get information from them. You can do the same in Couch. You can do that. But what's the problem with that? The problem with that is if you want to scale, then relying on those other documents being there might not be a good idea. What if they're in another shard? They're not in your current shard. Where are you going to get them from? You can't. That code does not work across multiple shards. You're dealing here with partitions. You know, when you talk about scaling, you talk about partitioning your data all the time. I mean, Facebook, they run a MySQL. And do you know how they get so fast? Well, how it works, how they scale? They just partition their data extensively across multiple instances. You know, same with Raven, same with Couch. But you're kind of forced down that route because a document's meant to be a self-contained thing that you use for doing your writes and your reads, if you're doing things that way. Also, the code's a lot easier to understand. If we go back to that Couch example and that Raven example, to get this information out in Raven in a denormalized fashion, I need to do, well, let's go back to those again, shall we? There we go. Let me tell you that most of this is just so I can load data from other documents, jumping through some hoops. If I was in a relational database, that would be a big set of joins, jumping through some hoops. Don't really want to do that. I just want to build an application, get some data out. If we look at my Couch example, where I've just denormalized the data into my item like this, my code for actually getting it out is very simple. Because, let's go find it again. There we go. I just ask for it. Just go and get it. Put it on there. The code's very explicit and easy to understand. So I'm a big fan of it just for that purpose alone, never mind the scalability. Because let's face it, scaling concerns don't really affect most of us, like now, especially building something new. Obviously, sometimes it's appropriate to normalize data anyway, and again, document database is useful for that because of the schema-less fashion. So, for example, if I'm adding items to a shopping cart, and I ship that shopping cart, and that's now a shipped order, I don't want to have a relation between that and a product. Because that product's going to change in the future, the price is going to go up and down, the name's going to change, it's going to go out, it's going to disappear, it's going to be not deleted, but decommissioned or whatever. So actually, I might want to normalize that data just because it makes logical sense to do so. And because of the schemaless nature of document database, it's very easy to do that. Because you just dump data in. So I get to say, yeah, when this product shipped, it was this price, it was called this, this is information about it. But the question I'm always asked when doing this is, how do I define my document boundaries? How do I define what a document is? How do I define what a document is? I've just said here, in my model, let's go and look at different models for just the to-do list. Here's a to-do list. I've got a list of to-do items on it. So this will be stored as one big blob of JSON. And it also happens that on this big blob of JSON, I've got the name too. In Hibernate, it looks like that scheme I showed you before, where I've got 3 tables across the place. In my RavenDB example, I've also got things as one big blob of data. But there are certain times where you might not want to do this. And to-do item might actually be a document in its own right. It causes a modeling problem for us all. But under what circumstances should we do that? And how should we determine how we do this? These are the only two rules I tend to follow in modeling documents in something like this, especially for web application. And what I try to say is, a write operation should only impact a single document. So if I send a command in from my form through my controller, I should only modify one document. If you're using Mongo, you have to, almost. Because it doesn't support transactions or bulk operations of any kind. You don't do that kind of thing. You make a change, it happens. You haven't got any guarantees. If you make changes across multiple documents, some might succeed, some might fail. It's a problem for you. Couch, last time I checked, didn't do it either. And rightfully so. Because if you're doing transactions across multiple document operations, what are you going to do when you've got those different documents and different shards? Are you going to do a distributed transaction? Probably not. Because that's going to completely mess up your partition tolerance. RavenDB does support that. It supports transactions both in a single instance and across multiple instances. But I would advise you never do that. So you should model documents around that. But of course, it's all very well and good saying, hey, model documents around transaction boundaries. What's that mean? And what does that mean? So here's some examples. A bit of audience participation now, so you can pay a little bit of attention if I've even explained anything at all correctly. Our to-do list application. I'll do this one. I can say with certainty, at the moment, certainly, that when I'm editing a to-do list on a web form, I'm editing a to-do list. I'm adding items to it, I'm modifying its name, I'm doing these things. A single operation will only impact that document. I'm not going to have multiple users editing multiple items within a to-do list because they belong to a user. My transactional boundary is around this to-do list. Because I'm not going to get conflicting changes on different parts of that model. At least not regularly. I might, and there are ways to deal with that, and you should expect it sometimes. But for the most part, I'm not going to. The next example is blog posts and blog comments on that blog post. So, quick poll, hands up. Should I store the comments on the blog document itself? Hands up, anybody who thinks that? Cool, there's some people who think that. Brilliant. We'll have a discussion about it. Who thinks we shouldn't do that? And why shouldn't we do it? Why do you think we shouldn't? Is there a good reason? Yep. Yeah. You have multiple users editing comments to blog entry. So you have multiple people enacting change on a single document at the same time. It's going to cause some headaches. And yes, you can do some logic around that to detect the fact that these documents are changed. In Couch, it'll actually create two versions of that conflicted documents, and you can merge them if you want to. I'm not going to write that code. I'm going to try and avoid that as much as I can, because I'm aiming for simplicity here. So I'm curious, the people who say that they should be on the same document, why is that? Sorry? Okay, so what you're saying there is you want to get the blog entry and the comments out in one hit. Sorry? Yes. But, so one of the reasons, as you rightly point out, is for querying purposes. When I view a blog entry, I want to see the blog entry and its comments. I want to do that in one hit. Well, I actually don't think that's the case. I'm happy to do 2 hits. One to get the blog entry, one to get the comments. Because it's still only 2 hits. That's still better than doing an n+1 by accident, isn't it? 2 hits isn't that bad. Are there any other good reasons I've missed out here for doing that? So it's just that. There are also ways around that in Raven as well, obviously, and in Couch, where you can actually load up documents from a list of IDs and what have you. But let's not go there. I think the best example I've got, if you Google Stack Overflow and RavenDB, you'll find the blog entry I wrote where I actually did a very complicated model. And I determined that in the Stack Overflow thing, if you were to model that, votes would be their own document. You wouldn't store votes in the document. Answers would be their own document. Questions would be their own document. Because you have all the edits coming into all of these things, and they're all separate. And also, you might have 5,000 answers, 20,000 votes. And document size probably does matter if you're going to be loading these things out. So you think about these concerns when you're loading your data, when you're actually doing your documents. You should be thinking about who's writing to the document, how are they writing to it, what operations am I performing on this document. If on that document you've got methods that actually tell you what's being enacted on the document, it should be fairly clear where your boundaries are. You also have to think about size when doing it, because you don't want a document that's 2 megabytes. Not really. I'm not going to be displaying that all the time. You should be thinking about that. Most likely you want to show a summary, an aggregate of how many votes are there for that, how many comments are there for that. Here's the first 5. You don't want to load the whole lot at one go. So there is some disparity here. And this leads us nicely onto the next subject. Because here I'm saying we have a data store and we're compromising our documents because we're thinking about both the read concerns and the write concerns. And to a large extent, that's true. So CQRS, hands up, people heard CQRS? Good, okay. Who thinks it's really complicated? Good, okay, fine. Most people, when I say CQRS, think it's really complicated. We all know what CQRS is, right? But I have to go through this. I can show you. Oh, I had a lovely diagram, but I've deleted it. Wonderful. Anyway, for the most part, when designing my documents, this is how I see things. My documents are my write model. So I'm writing to them. They're a write model. I don't really use them for views. I might if I want to. Most of the time I don't. My indexes and my views are a read model. Because both in Couch and Raven, they are actually a different store over here. In Raven, they're stored in Lucene. In Couch, I think they're stored in big, crazy computer science structures, B-trees and the like. Doesn't really matter. They're stored elsewhere. They're in a different store. And if you build your application on top of this and you say, look, my indexes, they're a read model, and my documents, they're a write model, and you build on top of that, you get something very simple emerging. But yes, it's not like this. There you go. When doing input, I do my validation, I go for my control, I send a command, I do a single method call in a single document and update that document. There's an action, there's a command. And for doing views, I just query a view, get some data out, because it's simple. However, view concerns do leak into your documents, so obviously we are breaking principles slightly by doing this. But you know what? I would argue that in most cases, this is not a bad thing. You shouldn't be scared of doing it. If you're building a system that's going to have to be maintained for the next 2 decades, and you have an awful lot of complex business logic and some really complicated views, probably not using a document database anyway. Probably doing some other crazy architectural stuff to make things easy for yourself. If you're doing a nice simple application, even a shopping store online or whatever, I'm not sure I'd write one yourself, but hey, if you want to do that, feel free. Writing my first blog engine, writing, I don't know, give us examples. What product have you done? A to-do list application. We all love those. Anything like that. It doesn't matter. Denormalizing data is not a problem. Happy to do it. Who disagrees with that, by the way? Or are you just being very polite? Okay, I'll assume you all agree with me because it'll help my ego. With regards to managing that, obviously encapsulate the logic for doing the denormalization. Obviously, do that. Feel free. Keep things neat and tidy. But don't be afraid of doing it. It's not a problem. And the next thing is, actually, with modern web apps, we're beginning to move more and more into this world where we are binding JSON to some kind of templating engine in JavaScript to generate a nice, cool UI with awesome user experience, with slidey gradient things around corners. We're all doing that, right? Well, I'm doing it because it's cool. But the point is, what I want is JSON in my JavaScripts. That's what I want. This, by the way, is invalid code. I just thought it'd be really cool to have a bind method. whatever. Pretend it's template or something. However, what's wrong with this picture, people? Anybody? I didn't have to process it because it's quite a big picture. I apologize for that. Sorry? No. I mean, they're not actually layers. I mean, in all defense, they're the API that I'm using to get data from my document database. So the problem is, in my document database, I store things as JSON. And my views are all stored in JSON. And I pass JSON over HTTP. And yet, for some reason, whenever I write this code, I deserialize it into a POCO, because that's what the API does. I then reserialize it back into JSON again, send that over HTTP, and then send that to JavaScript. Now, this just seems over the top. I like my read layer to be thin. Very thin. I don't need any thickness at all, actually. So you can do this. JSON-P, who's heard of it? Anyone use JSON-P? Cool. I don't. But that's because I'm never in a trusted environment. The problem with JSON-P, if you're going to use that to allow access to your document database, is you're allowing access to the document database. And for certain things you can do that. You can always limit the calls that can be made. For example, saying, yep, you can make any call to CouchDB so long as it's going to this URL over here that looks like this. And that's a valid technique, right? Not a bad thing at all, as long as you operate on a whitelist only basis. What you don't want to do is allow people just to query for 20,000 items from your database and basically kill your system. But you know what, actually? Underneath both Couch and Raven, there's an HTTP API. And you can consume it directly. Here, I've hidden that conveniently behind a nice extension method called getJSON, because that's how I felt like doing it at the time. I'm going to skip out that entire middleman. So it looks like that. And I would strongly recommend doing that if you're working in the JavaScript environment in ASP.NET MVC. Just get your jQuery AJAX calls, I'm assuming using jQuery or something similar, to go to the database almost directly, or as directly as you can get it. Sometimes you might want to make service methods yourself. Certainly I've done that over here. So if I look at my lovely services controller, there you are. I'll call list top categories. But all I'm doing there is proxying the call directly to the HTTP endpoint and returning data. Thin. Nice and simple. So, there we go. So, my problem with relational databases for applications like this, and it's not serious problems, right? Because we're building applications on top of these stacks, and they work. They're not faulty. They just cause some headaches because we have lazy loading, which is a good thing, and you shouldn't turn it off, except when you actually need to. But the problem with lazy loading is that you have implicit, hidden select n+1 problems. You also, for your views, have potentially crazy SQL queries. Maybe not a problem if you've got a really beefy SQL server. On my virtual server, I certainly don't. And I'm using virtual server. But you do have the flexibility to query almost anything. From one place, you can probably somehow get the data from another. Because you can do joins across anything. You can do all sorts of crazy things in SQL. It's wonderful. But unfortunately, that does lead to some problems. Document databases, they restrict you. And it is a restriction. You do lose flexibility. Because you have to work with these self-contained documents. But they also help you. Because they say, hey, I'm actually going to say, this is how I create predefined views, and here's a mechanism to do that. This will happen in the background for you. We'll manage that for you. Which means when doing views for your MVC application, you can do a single lookup to this lovely database which does it for you, for the most part. You have still got n+1 problems, but they're explicit. And it's a fairly clear instruction to give to a developer. If you're calling load in a for loop, you're probably doing it wrong. Right? It's very easy to see that you're doing that. Okay, it's slightly harder if you're doing if you're using link, because it's an implicit for then. But you can still see, hey, I'm querying all these child documents. Why am I doing that? And obviously, if you bring out Fiddler, you can look at all the HTTP calls going across the wire and say, hang on a second, what are all these doing? What's this? This is nonsense. What you haven't got to do is use nhprof or something similar. I'm not sure what the alternatives are, SQL profile or SQL trace or whatever, and start looking at the SQL queries themselves and go, is this an efficient query? I don't know, because I'm a developer, I don't do SQL. DBA, is this a valid query? Using an ORM, I hate you. That's my last company, projecting slightly. But yeah, we have potential here for a really thin read layer too. Because when you're querying via an ORM and you're getting back these lovely lazy load entities, serializing that message JSON probably isn't that easy. Obviously, you can do a direct SQL query, which I think people are moving towards these days. They're getting less scared of SQL again. It's cool how things go up and down and backwards and forwards, right? But you can do that and create JSON, but there's a bit of effort. The point is, with a document database, I'm storing things in JSON. My views are in JSON. Getting JSON to my JavaScript, well, the two are very compatible. If you're working in Couch, your views are created using JavaScript. I'd probably go on hog here and say, actually, why am I using .NET MVC and not Node at this point? But that's neither here nor there. Let's not say that. I just did. But with Raven and with Couch to a certain extent, you can actually load related documents in a single call and pull things out. So you haven't got denormalize. You can do this in a single remote call. And we have got a dynamic model. We're not having to look after a schema of sorts. We can just store data how we choose. We can normalize data how we please, which gives us real flexibility when building web applications. Obviously, I haven't mentioned Mongo at all here. I'm going to do a summary here, and then I can rant for 10 minutes. It's my favourite thing to do, and answer questions and have some kind of conversation, if you're up for that. If you're not, we can go for a drink or something. So yeah. Anybody here already using a document database? Why are you in this session? I should have probably put that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Sorry, but I wanted the room to stay full. I was scared if I brought it up earlier, everyone would leave and I'd be talking to myself. Well, I'm sorry about that. But how'd you find it? Which one are you using? Okay. That's cool. I've used them in quite a few projects now. Nothing commercial, though. No one will let me for some reason. They're all scared of it. Anyone doing commercially document databases? Can I work at your company, please? Actually, no, I can't. I've just taken a job, so I can't do that. And he wouldn't let me anyway after this talk, right? I mean, you go, who's this Muppet? What's he doing? I go back to my first slide and say, I have too many slides. I apologise for that. I just realised. Wow, that's awful. Yeah, so anyway, yeah. Clearly, I'm a Muppet. You wouldn't hire me. Any questions? Can I explain and elaborate anything further? Because I have glossed over many, many details. I've just kind of assumed. Yes? I like that. That's a really nice way of describing it. So for those who didn't hear that, he's pointed out, it's actually the obvious, but I've never thought of explaining it that way, which is, with a database, the application serving the data. You have a database, got data, and the application serves that need. With this, we're actually inverting that, and we're saying, actually, I have an application, it has these needs, and I'm going to store data in this store over here to serve my needs. And no, it's largely going to be reliable, fast, and simple to use. Going back to the denormalizing point, does anybody really strongly dislike denormalizing data in that way? You probably wouldn't. There you go. Beautiful. Good question. How do you report on this data? Reporting is a separate need, right? And it is a separate need. It's not part of the application. If you're using a SQL database and you're using it for your application's logic, doing the writing, you're using it for generating all the views on your site, and you're using the same database and data structure for doing reporting, you've probably got some problems there. Mainly because things are going to be brittle. You can't change that easy, and you're going to end up having to sacrifice performance in one place to satisfy the needs of another. So what do you do in that case? Go on, Em. Oh, there you go. Exactly. Stick it in a star schema. Do something with it that actually gives you some... So, with both Raven and I think Couch to a certain extent, again, certainly in Raven, you can actually say, these indexes here, map them onto a relational database for me, please. And do that automatically in the background. So actually you can create a reporting database from the data that's in there and do reporting on that. Now, obviously, you might point out at that point that I'm almost then imposing a schema on my dynamic model. Implicitly. Because I've got indexes looking at properties and expecting those to be there. And I've got code against those documents expecting properties to be there. You know, it's valid. And then I've got a reporting database that expects data to be there as well. Tests? That's what I tend to go for on this particular front. It's the whole dynamic language versus static language debate at this point, where you talk about it being dynamic and you're consuming it and imposing a schema, therefore actually making it static. But yeah, I just do that. Bring it out to somewhere where it actually belongs. I mean, if I was to do searching, text searching in a relational database, I probably wouldn't. I'd take the data and stick it in Solr or Lucene and search that. So a similar story there, right? You know, I take data out of one form and stick it somewhere for one specific purpose. I think when I'm building an application from the top down, because vertical slices, I have a feature, I want it, that it kind of makes sense to evolve the database over time, and this works very well for that. Any other comments, abuse, slander, questions? Yes? It's a good question. So the question is there a limit on creating these indexes? In Couch or Raven, in fact. Let's use both of them again, because I'm trying to remain vaguely agnostic here. I'm hoping I'm succeeding, by the way. Two different models. In Raven, the indexes are processed in a background thread. So they're not done on read and they're not done on write. They're just done on a dirty basis. And the bottleneck for the information is the hard drive. If you've got an SSD, you can probably get quite a lot in there. But yes, the more indexes you have, the longer it will take to do indexing in Raven. You can solve that by sharding and having different stores for different indexes, which Raven supports. In Couch, it's different. Because, to my knowledge, and I'm sure people can correct me if I'm wrong, the indexes are only updated when you query them. So theoretically, you can throw absolute loads in there, and as long as you're not using them all, then you're probably okay. But if you're not using them all, why are they in there in the first place? So you have limits there as well, obviously. But that's more... it's coming from a different angle. With regards to giving a number for that, I'm not going to, because I can't. I'd be lying if I said I could. We have tested Raven with a few thousand. It was fine with an SSD. I'd imagine with a spinny hard drive, probably a bit worse. But as Uncle Bob said earlier, stop using spinny hard drives. Looking at all of you that are. And congratulating all those who aren't. Yes? By short tables, you mean key value blobs. I'd like to say yes. And I'd like to say yes. I wonder if it's at the conference, actually. There's a guy who made CISO DB. Have you heard of CISO? S-I-S-O DB. Doing just that, only formalizing the notion of doing indexes on top of that and putting things into queryable forms. It's a really neat concept, actually. So using SQL Server, you have an ID and a blob of XML, for example. XML and SQL Server anyway, because you can actually query XML if you want to in SQL Server. Is that a document database? It's documents in a database. Well, in that case, you're asking the question of the ignorant then. I can't answer the question. Go back to the first slide with the Muppet on it. Let's go for that. It's my look right now. Don't know. Anyway, it's 20 past 5 according to my clock, which means it's time for beer. Or is it more sessions? There's another session, isn't it? Beer, then another session, because there's a hotel across the road. If you want to ask us a question about RavenDB and things like that, I'm happy to go and do that. In that case, I'm done, I think.